Hey YouTube, Rambling Nerd here, and just the other day, I was thinking about how I had a half-finished printer sitting on my bench, when some teensy-loving cyborg pointed me out, and now that Project Senpai has noticed me, I must get this weekend project knocked out. This is a friend of mine's printer, and he picked it up used, and wouldn't you know it stopped working immediately, not even a single print came off. So I have it here on the healing bench, let's see if we can figure out what the problem is. This is the Monoprice Select Mini V2, a clone of the Milan M200. Back in ye olde days, before our benevolent Omnicorp overlords irrevocably set Amazon into motion, this was the destination for cheap audio cables and converters or anything else you'd need to plug into an amplifier. Whenever I was putting together a go bag for an audio gig of one kind or another, they were always the best place to commit to that symmetric game theory fallacy of median value pricing. Because when cheap is cheaper, you can afford the premium. I bought this as my very first 3D printer. It was on clearance at Monoprice as refurbished for literally half off at a paltry $120 2018 dollars. They're still amazing, but I'm getting off track here. I picked this up for half price and scooped a keg of filament at my local micro center. I promptly ran off this gorgeous prized print of mine, and I've been spewing out cheap plastic baubles with a mixed but ever improving success rate ever since. But I found it harder to just part out larger prints than I initially thought, and in less than 6 months I upgraded to the Ender 3 Pro. But now I'm full-blown rambling, let's get back to the matter at hand. The main issue with this printer is that the bed stopped heating up. This is a very common issue for these kind of printers, where the wiring will suffer a stress break internally due to questionable routing. So we'll reroute these wires and probably extend them a bit to allow for that routing. And since we'll be in there with our soldering iron already, we'll take care of a few extra things. Mostly, it's an excuse to explain soldering on a basic level, but we have more issues, because despite the stylish speed holes, this poor little mainboard is cooking, and we've been having skip steps and weird screen glitches at an increasing rate. So, I went ahead and added this fan to the mainboard. This is an issue for all 3D printers, but especially cheap 3D printers. Mainboard fans are one of their favorite cost-cutting corners to cut. And when your mainboard starts to overheat, it can cause all kinds of wonky, hard to diagnose issues, and it can even end up damaging the board itself. After all, there's a tiny little CPU in there, and 4 little stepper motor drivers all tucked in on there, so it's important to keep your board cooled and well ventilated, just like a PC, which it is. As for this little bracket, there are many models like it, but this one is not mine. You can find the mod list in the description. Now onto the fan. Part selection is key for the fan here, and choosing the right component is about carefully weighing the details and deciding what compromises you must insist on. For example, this 40 by 20 millimeter fan is twice as thick as the typical 4010 axial fan, and besides the higher static pressure that affords it, and the fact that it can move much more air at lower RPMs, this particular fan is vastly superior to every other 4010 fan in existence for one key reason. I had it on hand. All the other fans in my part drawer are 24 volts for my Ender 3 are completely the wrong size, and rather than sink more money and time into ordering a part and twiddling my thumbs while I wait for it to arrive, I didn't let the fact that my longest M3 screw is 24mm stop me. I got the job done. Though, I did take care to at least manage the location of the zip tie heads, keep them out of the way, a little neater. Just because it's hacked doesn't mean it has to look jank. But here comes the wiring. I don't really want to get into how I decided to splice these wires into the fan cable, so I'm just going to say it's outside the scope of this video and quickly transition into a flashy soldering demo. If you've never soldered before, don't panic, and don't let the fact that you're mechanically and electrically bonding materials with molten metal fool you. It's super easy. Whenever you're soldering a wire, first things first, make sure you put a heat shrink on it, kind of like this. That way you don't forget and have to redo the connection. And if you're already a cool soldering cat and you have a nifty heat shrink assortment like this, or way better, you may also want to consider adding a JST terminal assortment to your collection. And not to ramble, but these bad boys are pretty cool. They make it super easy to have quick connectors for 2 through 5 wires, and since they include male and female terminations, you get both ends for less than $20. But anyway, after we've made sure the heat shrink is on, go ahead and turn on or plug in your soldering iron so it can start to heat up. You want to go ahead and mesh the wires together. Do your best to avoid bending them or crimping them. They should easily slide together. Then, we're going to flux the wires. Flux is just a magic sort of paste that when it melts, it cleans all the oxidation off the contact areas, and the pool that it makes encourages the melted solder to wick along it, kind of like lava in a lava lamp. And don't think your rosin core solder can save you. Even with this MG Chemical 2.2% 22 gauge solder, it's not enough, and you'll see the difference with just a bit of flux applied. After we've meshed and fluxed our wires, we can check that our iron is hot by going ahead and wetting the iron's tip with a gentle poke of the solder to see if it melts. The solder on the tip is going to help transfer heat from the tip into whatever joint we're soldering. Then we'll go ahead and gently press the tip with the solder bead into the wires. And you'll see it resist initially, but this is just to start heating up the wires until they're hot enough to start melting it right off the line, just like it was on the tip. We're going to feed just enough in so that we can see it wick across the area, but not too much more, and lay down any heat shrink piercing stragglers like this guy. Good. Give that a second to cool down so we don't automatically heat shrink our heat shrink, and go ahead and slide it over and warm it up, and you've just made a solid connection. Just make sure you actually get the wires hot enough to melt the solder. I tend to do open wires this thick around 345C. Otherwise, you're probably just going to see it kind of rejecting the solder, like this. Yeah, this is no good. Even if you manage to coax a droplet onto both of the wires, the connection's going to be worse than a crimped connector because it didn't soak into the wire at all. You want to make sure that you see the solder wicking into the connections. And here's an iron at 410C with no flux. And I guess it melted the solder, but you can see it has the same problem wicking. Good flux lets solder wick right. It just keeps soldering cool. But wait, I've almost completely forgotten about the bed wire, which I guess is kind of easy to do when I've already completed. I actually had to redo this wire loom so many times that I gave up trying to film it and just got it done after the 5th try. But the process isn't as important for this particular printer as what this is setting out to achieve. The old wiring was bound to the main body, kind of like this, so whenever the bed would slide back and forth during printing, it would only bend in this one spot. This kind of focuses the stresses into what ultimately became a stress break. Just like when you bend a metal coat hanger back and forth until it breaks. It only really works if you're going to keep bending it in the same spot. And that's what we have here. So to prevent stress bends, I pulled the thermistor and bed heater wires through the back here and put them through this nice little strain relief. They're all in the description, I promise. It takes a long, lazy kind of path into this nice curve, making sure there's no point in which it can concentrate the bend into a particular spot to end up with another stress break. The bed wiring comes into the main body through this nice little design feature on the side panel, where the same grommet from the poopy wiring can be neatly reused to ensure there's no rubbing issues as it moves. And if you're wondering what this springy material is I'm putting around all this, it's sold as braided cable sleeve or wire loom sleeving, and it's dirt cheap and definitely my favorite way to make the hairiest wire nest look like a well-designed wire loom. I had plans to wire in this LED strip so it'd power on whenever the printer powered on, but I'm getting this project done this weekend and back to my bored friend who needs it, so I left the idea of adding features for a later point. And maybe it'll encourage him to buy his first soldering iron. At any rate, let's power this thing up and see if we did any good. Well, at least the bed heats now, so we got that going for us. And everything else seems to be in working order. The printer is working well now, except for, oh wait, what's this in here? Come on, I've been here almost 10 minutes. They should probably get their own video. So till then, I've been the Rambling Nerd. Stay nerdy, and try not to ramble.